The alien palace was vast, built from dark stone that glittered faintly under the soft glow of floating crystals. Tall pillars rose high, holding the weight of ceilings that seemed to stretch into the sky. Strange patterns ran across the walls, carved by careful hands of artisans long ago. To most visitors, this place would feel intimidating, cold and endless. To Daniel, the human explorer now standing inside its grand hall, it felt like a place out of a dream. Daniel's wrists were bound by a thin metallic band, but it was not tight. It was more a symbol than a restraint, for he knew he could not escape from this place even if he wanted to. Dozens of alien guards had led him here, each towering over him, their golden armor shining and their movements precise. They treated him like an unusual creature rather than a threat. Daniel felt their eyes on him as if they were wondering why someone so small and fragile had been brought before their ruler. At the end of the great hall sat the queen herself, Sira. She was tall, elegant, and regal in every motion. Her eyes glowed faintly with a violet light, and her crown was not a separate object but a natural growth of crystal that rose from her head, shimmering softly. Her presence filled the room. She did not need to speak to command respect. Her silence was enough. Zara had ruled her empire for many years. To her people, she was wise, strong, and unquestioned. Entire star systems bowed before her rule. Many species had entered her hall in chains, trembling before her throne. But this human was different. He did not tremble. He did not look down. His eyes studied the hall, then calmly rested on her. This quiet confidence puzzled her. The queen spoke, first her voice deep yet smooth. "Human, do you know where you stand?" Daniel nodded slightly. In the palace of a queen, Zara's lips curved into the smallest trace of a smile. "Correct. Do you know whose palace this is?" "Yours," Daniel answered simply. The queen leaned forward on her throne. "Then you understand your situation? You are my captive. Your ship entered my space without permission. Your presence here is not a matter of choice, but consequence." Daniel gave a small shrug. "That is true. My ship malfunctioned. I had no control over where it drifted. But I do not deny being here." Zira tilted her head. She was used to captives, making excuses, begging for mercy, or trembling in fear. This human's calmness was almost unsettling. "Do you know what happens to captives who fall into my hands?" she asked, her tone sharp. Daniel paused. He thought for a moment before speaking, his voice steady. "I do not, but I imagine it depends on why they were brought before you." The queen's eyes narrowed. "You imagine? You are not afraid?" Daniel looked directly at her. "Of course I am afraid. But fear is not useful to me right now. What matters is how I choose to answer you." A quiet murmur passed through the guards standing along the hall. No one had ever heard a captive speak like this. The queen herself was silent for a moment, surprised at his words. Then she asked, "Why do humans like you travel into the stars at all? You are not the strongest species. Your body is weak compared to others. Your world is not the richest. What makes you think you belong among the stars?" Daniel took a slow breath. He felt that this was no ordinary question. The queen was testing him, not just in words but in meaning. She wanted to see what lay at the heart of a human. He answered, softly, but his voice carried across the hall. "Humans explore not because we are strong, but because we cannot stop seeking what lies beyond." The hall grew still. The words were simple, yet they struck the queen in a way she did not expect. She had heard countless speeches from countless leaders. They spoke of strength, of power, of wealth, of conquest. But this human spoke of something else entirely. An inner need to search, to reach, to never be satisfied with limits. For the first time in many years, the alien queen felt silence in her own thoughts. She did not reply immediately. She simply looked at him, her violet eyes glowing faintly brighter as if they were trying to read the truth in his soul. Daniel stood calmly, not forcing more words. He had spoken honestly, and honesty needed no decoration. Finally, the queen leaned back in her throne. "You are strange, human. Your words are not those of a warrior, yet they carry a weight I cannot ignore. Daniel gave a small nod. Maybe it is because I am not here to fight. I am here because life pushed me this far. Humans. We are driven by curiosity. It is not always wise. It is not always safe. But it is who we are. The Queen's hand rested lightly on the arm of her throne. For a moment she considered dismissing him or ordering him locked away. But something about his answer held her still. She remembered the many worlds her empire had conquered. She remembered the speeches of alien kings who once stood before her, always boasting of armies and fleets. None had spoken with such quiet truth. Her mind whispered a question to herself. Could such a fragile being truly hold something my empire has never known? But she did not voice that thought. Instead, she said, "You will not be judged today, human. I will keep you here, not as a slave, but as a curiosity. I will hear more of your kind. I will decide in time if your presence is of value or danger." Daniel bowed his head slightly, not as a gesture of submission but of respect. "As you wish, your majesty." The Queen raised her hand and the guards stepped forward, but instead of dragging him away, they guided him gently toward a side chamber prepared for his holding. It was not a cell of stone, but a quiet room with soft lights and a single bed. It surprised Daniel. He had expected something far harsher. As he was led away, the Queen watched him go, her mind unsettled. His words echoed within her. We cannot stop seeking what lies beyond. For the first time in many years, the Queen of an empire found herself wondering, not about conquest, not about power, but about the meaning of those simple human words. She sat in silence long after the hall had emptied, staring at the crystals above her throne, lost in thought. The palace of Queen Zira was quiet that night. Outside, the skies of her world glowed with twin moons casting silver light across tall spires and wide courtyards. Inside the palace walls, silence filled the chambers, broken only by the soft hum of energy crystals. It was a place of order, discipline, and unshaken rule. Yet the Queen herself was not at peace. Shira sat alone in her throne room, her long robes flowing like liquid metal. She leaned her chin on one hand, her violet eyes fixed on nothing. The words of the human Daniel still echoed inside her thoughts. Humans explore not because we are strong, but because we cannot stop seeking what lies beyond. It was not a speech of power. It was not a cry of conquest. It was simple, yet it had struck her harder than the loudest declaration of war. She tried to dismiss it, but the thought returned again and again. Why did those words matter to her? Why could she not silence them? She was queen of an empire, entire star systems bent before her, and yet a single fragile human had unsettled her calm. Daniel, meanwhile, rested in the chamber given to him. It was not a prison cell. The walls glowed softly with blue light, and a large window overlooked the alien city below. He could see the tall towers rising high, connected by glowing bridges. Flying ships moved in perfect lines through the skies, never colliding, never drifting. The entire city looked as if it had been designed by one hand, precise and flawless. But to Daniel, it also looked lifeless. There was no music drifting through the air, no laughter echoing from the streets, no signs of children playing or people gathering. It was beautiful, yes, but also silent. He pressed his hand to the window and whispered to himself, "A world without noise is a world without heart." He knew he was being watched. A crystal orb floated quietly in the corner of the room, glowing faintly. It was surely some kind of surveillance. Daniel did not mind. He had nothing to hide. The next morning, the guards returned. They were tall, their golden armor shining, their movements perfectly timed as if they were parts of one machine. They bowed before the Queen and then brought Daniel once again into her presence. He stood before the throne, calm as before. Sira leaned forward. "Human, you spoke words last night that stay with me. Explain them." Daniel met her gaze. Which words, Your Majesty? Her violet eyes glowed brighter. You said your kind cannot stop seeking what lies beyond. Why? Why wander into the stars if your bodies are weak and your worlds are small? Why risk so much? Daniel thought. For a moment. He spoke slowly, choosing simple words. Because it is our nature. On Earth, long ago, humans were not the strongest creatures. We had no claws, no thick fur, no wings. Yet we learned to survive. We crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and sailed oceans. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because something inside us pushed us forward. Curiosity, maybe, or hope. We do not travel the stars because we can. We travel because we cannot imagine staying still. The hall fell silent. Even the guards, who usually stood like statues, glanced at each other in quiet surprise. The Queen sat back slowly. Curiosity, she repeated. Hope? Daniel nodded. Yes. These are not things you can weigh or measure, but they move us more than fear or power. For a long moment, Zyra said nothing. She was stunned again by the simplicity of his words. She had heard rulers speak of armies, fleets, and treasures. None had spoken of hope. The Queen raised her hand. A servant stepped forward, carrying a tray with strange objects, pieces of crystal carved into shapes like puzzles. She placed the tray at Daniel's feet. Test him, Zyra commanded. The days passed slowly inside the palace of Queen Zyra. The human Daniel was still kept under guard, but his chamber remained comfortable. He was allowed food, water, and even a small library of glowing crystal tablets that carried the history of her empire. Every morning, guards came and brought him to the throne room where the Queen waited. Zyra was not finished with him. Her mind still replayed his words, his strange answers, and his unusual way of thinking. To her, Daniel was a puzzle. In himself, a being weak in body but strong in something unseen. She wanted to know more. She wanted to see what else he would reveal if tested further. So she began a series of trials. On the first morning of these new tests, Daniel entered the throne room to find a wide table set before the Queen's throne. Upon it lay dozens of objects, small glowing cubes, thin crystal rods, and flat circular discs. They looked like toys, but Daniel could tell they had been arranged with purpose. Zyra's violet eyes fixed on him. Human, she said, these are puzzles. My people use them to measure skill, patience, and thought. If you wish to remain in my palace as more than a prisoner, you will solve them. Daniel smiled faintly. I will try. The Queen leaned back in her throne, curious. She wanted to see how this fragile creature approached a challenge. The first puzzle was simple. The cubes were to be stacked into a pyramid. The rods had to be used to balance the layers. Daniel studied them carefully. Most would have begun stacking immediately, but he paused, thinking first. Then he began. Slowly, carefully, he arranged the pieces, testing each layer before adding the next. His hands were steady and he did not rush. The pyramid grew taller, glowing softly under the lights of the hall. When he finished, it stood firm and balanced. The Queen gave a small nod. Acceptable, but simple. Daniel only shrugged. Every journey begins with small steps. The second puzzle was harder. The discs had to be arranged to fit perfectly within a pattern carved into the table. Each disc was slightly different in size, and they could only fit in one exact order. Many of Zyra's people struggled with this task for hours. But Daniel looked at the discs, then at the pattern. He tapped one against another, listening to the faint sound they made. These are not only shapes, he murmured. They have weight. They have sound. He closed his eyes for a moment, then began placing the discs, not only by sight but by touch. One by one they clicked into place, until the pattern was complete. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. She had not expected him to notice such small details. You solved it differently than we would, she said. Daniel nodded. Sometimes our eyes do not see enough. So we listen, we feel, we imagine. Humans are not always precise, but we use every sense we have. The Queen said nothing, but inside she felt another small spark of surprise. The next day, the puzzles grew stranger. This time it was not objects but riddles. One advisor stepped forward holding a crystal tablet. He read aloud, "A river has no mouth, yet it speaks. It has no arms, yet it embraces. It has no bed, yet it rests." "What is it?" Daniel chuckled softly. "A river is a river, but your words hide something. You mean time. Time flows like water, never stopping, always moving forward." The advisor's eyes widened. Even he had not expected that answer. Zira studied Daniel carefully. "You solve with imagination. My people would search for logic. You search for meaning." Daniel nodded. "Logic builds walls. Imagination builds doors." The queen leaned back, thoughtful. She began to realize something. Each time Daniel answered, he was not simply solving. He was showing her another way of thinking, another way of seeing. His words were simple, but they carried weight. As the days passed, the puzzles continued. One day he was asked to rearrange glowing stones so that their colors formed a perfect pattern. Instead, he arranged them into a spiral. "This is not the correct answer," said the advisor. Daniel only smiled. "Perhaps, but your pattern ends. Mine continues forever." The queen stared at the spiral. For some reason, it unsettled her. It reminded her that perfection, as her people saw it, might also mean limitation. Another day, he was asked to describe what he saw in a set of shifting lights. Most described the lights as simple shapes, but Daniel said, "I see mountains at dawn. I see ships sailing over an ocean. I see children running through fields of green." The hall grew quiet. His words painted pictures none of them had imagined. For the first time, some of the guards whispered among themselves, intrigued. Zira silenced them with a look, but even she could not ignore the strange feeling in her chest. The human's imagination had reached even her, but not everyone in the palace was pleased. One evening, as Daniel was being escorted back to his chamber, two of the queen's advisors walked beside her throne. "Your Majesty," one said carefully, "this human is dangerous. He twists puzzles into strange shapes. He answers riddles with meaning instead of logic. If you let his ways spread, our people will lose their order." Another added, "He speaks like a poet, not a prisoner. He should not be tested further. He should be locked away." Zira raised a hand for silence. Her voice was calm but firm. "You fear him because he thinks differently. That is weakness, not strength. I will decide what becomes of him." The advisors bowed, but their eyes showed worry. That night, Zira returned to her private chambers. She sat by a tall window, gazing out at her empire's capital. Lights stretched across the horizon, perfect lines and perfect shapes. Everything worked in harmony. Everything was as it had always been. Yet Daniel's voice returned to her mind. "Logic builds walls. Imagination builds doors." She touched the crystal crown that grew from her head, its glow steady and unchanging. For the first time in years, she wondered, had her empire built too many walls? Had they forgotten the doors? Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his chamber, looking out at the alien city once more. He felt the weight of what was happening. He knew he was not simply solving puzzles. He was planting seeds, seeds of thought, seeds of curiosity. He whispered to himself, if even the queen begins to question, change is possible. The next morning, Zira called Daniel again. This time there were no puzzles on the table, no riddles, no objects. Instead, she asked him directly, "Human, what gives your kind strength when all the universe sees you as weak?" Daniel looked at her quietly, then said, "We adapt. Where others see only one way, we find many. We do not always win by being stronger, we win by being different." The queen was silent. His answer was simple, yet once again it shook her. For in that moment, she realized something about her empire. It was vast, powerful, and precise. But it was also rigid. If something unexpected came, something outside the walls of logic, would her empire be able to adapt? Or would it shatter like glass? She stared at Daniel, her eyes unreadable. You are still a captive, but you are also a mirror. You show me what my people cannot see. Daniel bowed his head slightly. Then perhaps I am useful. Zira did not answer, but deep inside she knew the human had already begun to change her. The palace was never truly quiet. Energy crystals glowed softly in every hall, and guards stood like statues along the walls. Servants moved with silent steps, carrying scrolls, trays, and reports to the queen's throne room. Yet, beneath this perfect order, there was a tension that had not existed before. The human was the reason. Daniel had been in the palace long enough that many had heard of him. Some guards whispered about his strange answers. Some servants repeated his sayings, curious about his view of life. The advisors, however, grew uneasy. To them, he was not a guest, but a danger. One evening, Queen Zira called a private meeting. Her advisors gathered in a circle of crystal seats around her throne. The air was heavy, the violet glow of her eyes brighter than usual. One advisor spoke first. "Your Majesty, this human has already stayed too long. He confuses our people. He does not respect order. His puzzles and riddles twist minds." Another added, "He must be removed. Send him to the mines or place him in a true cell. If his influence spreads, he will weaken us." Zira sat in silence, her long fingers tapping lightly on the armrest of her throne. Finally, she said, "He is only one human. Do you truly fear one voice?" "Yes," an advisor answered firmly, "because a single voice can spread doubt. Our empire is built on unity. Doubt breaks unity." Zira leaned back, her eyes narrowing. She remembered Daniel's words about walls and doors, about hope and imagination. Inside, she felt torn. She was queen, keeper of order. Yet she could not deny the truth she had begun to see. The next day, Daniel was brought to the throne room again. This time the queen did not present puzzles. She rose from her throne, her robes flowing like water, and said, "Today you will see my world." Daniel raised his eyebrows. "See your world?" "Yes," she replied. "You will walk outside this palace. You will look upon the city my people built. Then you will tell me what you see." The guards tensed at her words. No outsider had ever been allowed to walk freely through the capital, but none dared question her. The gates opened, and Daniel stepped outside for the first time since his capture. The alien city stretched wide before him. Towers of shining crystal rose high into the sky, their sides perfectly smooth. Bridges of mar light connected the spires, glowing with steady energy. Airships floated silently in the skies, moving in flawless lines. The streets below were wide and clean, filled with citizens in flowing robes, each walking with purpose. At first, Daniel was amazed. The beauty was undeniable. The buildings seemed. The twin moons of Zira's world hung low in the sky, casting silver light over the towering spires of her city. Inside the palace, a tense mood had settled. Whispers and hurried movements told a story of worry. The empire, perfect and orderly, as it appeared, faced a threat that no crystal wall or flying ship could fully predict. A nearby alien empire, one equally strong but less disciplined, had declared a challenge. Their ships moved toward Zira's borders unannounced, testing her defenses. Her advisors gathered in the council chamber, their faces serious. "Your Majesty," one said sharply, "they approach our borders. Our fleets are ready to attack. We must destroy them before they reach our cities." Another added, "They cannot be trusted. Their armies are chaotic, but they strike with force. We cannot waste time in diplomacy." Zira listened quietly. Her mind turned to Daniel, the human, whose words had begun to stir questions in her heart. Could his way of thinking, so different from her empire, offer something no fleet could provide? She rose from her throne, violet eyes glowing faintly. "Bring the human to me," she commanded. Daniel entered the council chamber, still calm despite the serious atmosphere. He looked around at the alien leaders, all tall and disciplined, their expressions tight with tension. The advisor's eyes narrowed. Why involve a human in military matters? They whispered among themselves, but none dared speak aloud. Syra gestured for Daniel to speak. You have seen our city, human. You have spoken of dreams, of hope, of freedom. Tell me, what would you do if an enemy approaches? Daniel paused. He thought carefully. I would not rush to fight blindly. Strength is useful, but only when combined with understanding. I would watch, listen, and learn their patterns. I would find a way to turn their strengths into weaknesses without destruction if possible. The council murmured in disbelief. Their advice had been simple. Strike first, strike hard. Yet Daniel's answer offered a different path. Explain, Zira said. Daniel nodded. Humans often face creatures stronger than us. We cannot match them in force, so we find other ways. Sometimes we make alliances. Sometimes we distract. Sometimes we use creativity. War is not only about ships and armies. It is about thinking ahead, using what the enemy expects against them. The queen leaned back, considering. This was not the usual strategy of her empire, but it had a spark she could not ignore. Go on, she said. Daniel explained slowly, carefully, ideas that were foreign to her advisors. Send messages of peace to confuse the enemy, making them doubt their strength. Use small groups to create unexpected diversions, giving her main fleet advantage. Observe patterns in the enemy ships, where they expect attacks, where they are weak, and strike in ways they do not anticipate. Allow minor losses in controlled areas to lure the enemy into traps. The advisors shook their heads in disbelief. This is foolishness, one said. You risk the empire. Zira silenced them with a hand. She turned her gaze to Daniel. Do you truly believe this will work? Do, Daniel said simply. It is not strength alone that wins, but cleverness, planning, and seeing what others cannot. The queen decided to take a risk. She allowed Daniel to outline his strategy to her generals. At first, the generals resisted, unsure if a human could direct their forces. But Daniel spoke calmly, explaining each step clearly. He showed maps, patterns, and possibilities, all in a way that combined logic with imagination. And slowly, they began to see the plan. The first signs of the enemy fleet appeared at the horizon. Their ships moved like dark clouds, huge and intimidating. The Empire's fleet prepared for battle, engines glowing, weapons ready. Daniel observed silently, pointing out positions, suggesting diversions, and predicting how the enemy would react. The queen followed his advice, issuing orders that seemed unusual. Small ships were sent where the enemy expected the main fleet. Messages of peace and confusion were sent to the enemy, causing hesitation in their ranks. The generals, though skeptical, executed Daniel's instructions precisely. The enemy attacked, expecting a straight battle. Instead, they were met with unexpected obstacles, diversions, and clever maneuvers. Confused, their ships collided and slowed, giving Zira's main fleet the upper hand. By the time the enemy realized what was happening, they were surrounded, trapped in patterns they had not anticipated. The battle ended without massive destruction. Few lives were lost, and the enemy was forced to retreat. In the aftermath, Zira walked among her people in the palace gardens. Her violet eyes glowed with thought. She turned to Daniel. You were right. Strength alone would not have won. You showed me another way. Daniel shook his head. I only suggested a path. You and your people carried it forward. You could have ignored it and relied on weapons alone, but you did not. You listened. The queen smiled faintly. I have ruled for centuries, and yet your thinking changed the outcome of this battle. You have shown me that being different can be a strength. Daniel nodded. That is what humans have learned over thousands of years. We are not always strong, but we survive. We adapt. We imagine. And sometimes we see what others cannot. The queen felt a new respect for him. He was still a captive, yes, but she no longer saw him as weak. He was a guide, a mirror, a teacher. The advisors, however, were uneasy. Your Majesty, one whispered, the human should not influence our strategy. He is not of our kind. Zyra raised her hand. He showed me a truth we cannot ignore. Adaptation and imagination are strengths we must learn. His ideas saved the Empire today. The council was silent. They could not argue against results. That night, Zyra stood on her balcony, looking at the city below. The streets were quiet, but the glow of the buildings reflected a subtle warmth. She thought of Daniel's words. Strength alone is not enough. Creativity, adaptation, and hope carry us further than power. She realized something about her people. They were strong, disciplined, and precise, but they lacked imagination. They had never faced something truly unpredictable. Until now. And Daniel had shown her that the spark of humanity, small, fragile, and simple, could overcome even the mightiest obstacle. Daniel, sitting in his chamber, looked out at the palace lights. He felt hope. Not for himself, not for freedom, but for the people around him. He knew he had planted ideas that would grow. The Queen had listened. Others had watched. The Empire had glimpsed something new. He whispered quietly, "Sometimes the smallest spark can light the greatest fire." The Queen returned to her throne, violet eyes steady. For the first time, she considered that the Empire might change. Not immediately, not without effort, but change was possible. And it was because of a human who dared to think differently, who spoke plainly, and who dared to hope. The palace was quieter than usual. The recent events with the neighboring empire had left ripples through the halls. Guards walked carefully, advisors whispered in corners, and citizens of the city spoke softly among themselves. Change had begun, though none could yet name it. Queen Zyra sat alone in her throne room. Her violet eyes reflected the glow of the crystal lights above. For centuries, she had ruled with strength, logic, and discipline. Every decision had been made with precision. Yet, something inside her had shifted. It was all because of Daniel, the human captive whose words and actions had stirred thoughts she had not felt in many years. Earlier that day, Daniel had been brought before her, as he had been many times before. But today there were no puzzles, no riddles, no challenges. Only a simple question hung in the air. "Human," the Queen said slowly, her voice calm yet heavy. "Tell me, why do humans continue to rise even when the universe shows them limits?" Daniel looked directly at her, his calm eyes reflecting neither fear nor arrogance. "Because we dream," he said. "We dream not just of surviving, but of becoming better. We imagine, we hope, we try, even when the odds are against us. That is why we continue." The Queen was silent. His answer was simple, yet it carried weight. It was not a strategy or a puzzle. It was truth. For centuries, Zyra had valued power above all else. She had believed that strength, order, and perfection were the pillars of success. And they had served her well. Entire star systems obeyed her. Her empire was vast, organized, and unchallenged. But now she understood something different. Strength without imagination could only take a ruler so far. A world without hope or dreams could only survive, never flourish. Daniel's presence had shown her a truth she could not ignore. That evening, Zyra called her advisors to the throne room. The air was tense as they gathered, whispering quietly to one another. "Your Majesty," one said nervously, "the human, he has already influenced too many minds. We should remove him now." Another added, "We cannot allow this disruption in our order. He is not of our kind." Zyra raised her hand, silencing them. Her violet eyes burned with authority, yet softened with thought. "You worry that one human can change an empire. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps he can. And perhaps we should ask ourselves why this is frightening. What is it about him that unsettles you?" The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen the Queen speak this way. Zyra continued, "I have watched him. I have listened to him. He is fragile, yet his mind is strong. His words have reached even me. And I realize Our empire has never faced this kind of strength before. Daniel was brought forward once more. The guards looked at him cautiously, yet he remained calm. He did not need chains to remind him of his place. He knew the rule.